Bonnie Woods, welcome. Thank you so much. And hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm always happy to speak to you, young Skywalker.
Well, it's an honor to call you a friend, Bonnie, and I'm so glad to connect with you again. I know we did a video with Karen de la Carrière a few months ago, and we talked about your court case. And I thought it'd be nice to follow up with that and talk about your experience at the protest last year. You came to St. Hill, and also a bit of history, your experience with Fair Game and, the anonymous movement and all of that. So first and foremost, how was the protest? It was the first time you've been out in a while, I think, right?
I liked it a lot. I did think they did their very best to obstruct our freedom of passage, so to speak. So I think St. Hill is a difficult place to protest because it's on the road like that. When we were in London with Anonymous, of course, we had more free space, sort of, with 700 people. I think I liked it. I liked going to the town because I think that's important. Because there was a point when I lived in the town. I lived in East Grinstead from 1993 until 2006. So all through the litigation and things like that, I lived in the town. And at that point in time, the churches together were very active in their holding a position against it infiltrating the town too badly. So at that point in time, people were more aware. But now, somehow, the tide is unfortunately turned, and their involvement with the publication of things for the town and their involvement has been internal. They've been pretty successful with the zone plan. So I thought it was good that we went to the town so that people's awareness gets up on what's going on.
I remember when we were marching through the town, we got to the top where where the little mini roundabout is, and normally if you're going to East Grinstead, you would turn left, but we were like, no, we're going to turn right and carry on going. It's because we wanted to walk through the town and have a presence, even though it's a little bit longer. It's like, no, we want to show people that this is a movement. There are people who are concerned about it, and we got a lot of locals kind of honking their horns and cheering us on, which was great. So I think public exposure is an important thing because there's a lot of residents who are concerned about Scientology's influence on the town, but are too scared to say anything because they don't want to upset their neighbors, So what has that changed since A, when you were in Scientology, and B, since the anonymous movement? Did Scientology have quite a tight grip on the council before anonymous and Churches Together movement and all of that, or is it notably worse now?
I would say it's very different now. At the time when I lived there, I remember doing a PowerPoint demonstration for city council and the mayor at his home. And they were very, at that point in time, and even the police at that time, I did a lot of work with the police because unfortunately there were many incidents of psychosis as a result of people leaving St. Hill in a deranged state is the best way to put it. And so I did a lot of close liaison with the police. So there was more of an awareness of the danger. The problem you're going to have with East Grinstead now is that a certain amount of complacency exists. The idea is if we don't give them eye contact, or we don't, have anything to do with them, we can stay in our safe little Sussex haven. And I think that that's why it's important to keep it on the forefront of their minds, because it's a new generation. When I lived in East Grinstead and we demonstrated in front of the testing center stroke bookshop daily, someone from one of the churches would have been there constantly. There was such a presence of information that no one went in, so they eventually closed it. And I know they haven't tried that approach. Their approach now is much more towards the website and being so helpful to be the webmaster and the council and things like that, which in a way I think is more pervasive than just outright. I mean, at least be outright. If you want to advertise yourself, at least stand up and do it.
And
Go ahead.
we're in this. I'm shocked to hear that you were able to give the mayor of East Grinstead a briefing, because I have been asking for well over a year, just for the opportunity to meet with councillors in private and talk to them about our concerns and give them a briefing on how Scientology works, what their policy is when it comes to safe pointing, exploiting vulnerable councillors and using their relationship in order to benefit them from a public relations standpoint, and just explain to them why this is an issue. Give them some real stories from real residents who suffered abuse at St. Hill, and just let them do what they want to do with it. But the key thing is getting in a room with them and giving them the briefing. And every single time I or any other resident who's an ex-Scientologist who has asked them for this have been denied. They've been rejected this opportunity. So the fact that this has happened in the past, they actually sat down with you, I think shows how far gone this current council is in terms of falling into their trap.
I think that at the time, you can never underestimate the strength of the Christian community. And at that time, I was approached by the council because the mayor was a member of Trinity Methodist Church. We went to East Grinstead in 1993 on the behest of Churches Together, because at the time I worked with an organization which no longer is functioning, which was a great organization called Deo Gloria Trust. And their mission was to inform families about destructive cults. So I was probably one of the few Christians who would speak publicly about it. But so I was asked to give that briefing. But at the time, it was well known that I was there in the town. We had 9 or 10 refugees from St. Hill come out through the Open Door Bookshop, which was a Christian bookshop. Interesting name. So they used to come in the front of the bookshop, and I would pick them up from the back. So we had some African refugees. We had some from Estonia. That was when Scientology was doing a great deal of recruitment in foreign countries. So the African young men that we had, I had kind of an underground railroad. So I would get them out, and then they would stay with the family locally until I could get them stabilized a bit more. And then oftentimes I would move them to families in Chichester or some other place far away from there. Not only because it made them more comfortable, because they were not comfortable, but also because Scientology, we learned from one young man, Scientology wanted him arrested. Well, I did go up to St. Hill and ask for his passport, which sort of stirred the hornet's nest. And I took the vicar of St. John Felbridge with me and asked for Noel's passport. I can talk about Noel freely because Noel is passed away. Unfortunately, he went back to Zimbabwe and had cerebral malaria. But Noel, when we went to get his passport, the receptionist, of course, called the Office of Special Affairs, and I said that was fine, they could come and talk. So they came over, and then before they could actually enter the reception area, they had already called the police to report Noel for stealing. So they wanted him arrested. So when the police car came, they came into the reception area. They said, "Hey, Bonnie." I said, "Hey." And they said, "Can you step outside?" I said, "Sure." And I said, "What's the problem?" And I said, "We'd like his passport." They said, "Right." So they went back and they said, "Okay, we'll be taking him with us, but we'd like his passport, please." So they got his passport. They put him in the back of a squad car, and we went down to the local police station. And I was often in the local police station, in the cells, because sometimes they would go there for protective custody, really. So, very dear Mr. Hodkin, and cohorts came to bring evidence of Noel's crimes to the front desk. And I know this because my husband was waiting there with the vicar. And they said, we think that she's here in the police station. Is Bonnie Woods in the police station? And the desk sergeant said, do you think we just let anyone in the police station? And that, which was clever, because he didn't say yes or no, and they kind of didn't catch on. But because it was an acknowledgement, they didn't pursue it further. So eventually we got Noel sorted out. He was down in the cells, and I happened to know the duty sergeant. So he said, Bonnie, he's in a cell, but the door's open. He's having a hot chocolate. Noel was a great singer, so I could hear him singing. So they said, we're going to take him to your house. Can we have your keys? So we gave him our house keys, and they took him and put him in my house. So that kind of thing went on. But there was quite a resistance movement, we could call it, I suppose. And I don't think that happens now. I don't know. I'm not there.
Well, I mean, there are support services, resources. There's a network there that's available for people who want to leave Scientology. You know, the Aftermath Foundation, for example, have a UK phone number, and if you call that, you immediately get put through to somebody, and whatever you need, they can provide. If it's someone to come and pick you up, there's volunteers that will come and grab you. If you need a place to stay, you know, they'll sort that out for you. They'll help you build a CV, a resume, and help you apply for jobs, and you know, whatever it is you need to land on your feet, you know, that support is there. But in terms of in the local community, it is difficult because a lot of people aren't prepared to speak out about Scientology or about their concerns, because, you know, that's my neighbor, or that's my colleague, or, you know, I've got friends or family who are in Scientology, and I don't want to rock the boat too much. And I completely understand that, but it you know, it does require people to stand up on their behalf and be their voice. And every time I go to East Grinstead and do some sort of activity, I get people approach me and say thank you for speaking out for us. And I think that goes to show that the concern is real, and it is a very large concern in East Grinstead.
I think it's also they're aware of fair game. They're aware of the reputation of Scientology and what that could mean to them personally. And I think that is a town that will protect itself from outside problems. I think that they were aware of fair game because Scientology distributed thousands of leaflets with my picture on it.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Bonnie. Like what because obviously I've been going through a lot of fair game at the moment, as I'm sure you've seen in the press. But I think it's really important to look at what's happened in the past. And as much as there is this new movement of protests, there's this new movement of activists, people who are concerned about Scientology in today's world, which is fantastic. I think it's really important to learn from the past and educate people on what happened before we came along. So many years before I even joined Scientology, you were out there standing with Anonymous, protesting. You were a very big activist, and you're very well respected and well loved in this community. But obviously you had a lot of fair game as a result of that. What was your experience with fair game like?
Well, it started when we moved to East Grinstead in 1993, and the churches together were so adamant they were not going to have a testing center in the town. So they began their vigils. At that point in time, Scientology at that point, I think, had used fairly aggressive fair game quite successfully for many years and didn't think there would be any drawback to that. So they actually produced a leaflet with my picture on it, which one of their surveillance PIs took when I was counseling in London, because they hired Eugene Ingram and a huge retainer to speak to all my family members, and I have them all over the world, so that was expensive. So then they produced a leaflet, and it said I was an anti-religious hate campaigner who used my born-again Christianity as a means of being a hate campaigner, and it had my picture on it from a shot from a PI. a kind of a blurry kind of video picture. But they distributed thousands of those, and there was like 4 issues of Freedom newspaper. And they had investigated through Eugene Ingram all of the personal details of my life. So they published that in their newspapers. But I would go in the grocery store in East Grinstead, and people would say, "Do you think it's her?" And I'd say, "Yes, it is. You want me to sign it?" It was hard for my children because my girls were young then, and I was a bit protective of them. And at one point, they demonstrated outside my house while I was in London, and they thought it was kind of tit for tat, but not really. Anyway, so I think people were aware of what was happening to us. So they thought, whoa, I'm not having that in my backyard. So then, because I had a very brave young solicitor, decided she didn't like the look of the leaflet. So she sent it to some barristers in London. And one of those young barristers picked up on it and said she wanted to do something about it. She was appalled that it had happened. So then it became a legal action. But just previous to that, if I would go down to the bookshop to demonstrate, then about 6 or 8 of them would come with the leaflets. They would get on buses, they would shout and point their finger at me and stand next to me. And well, you've met my husband. He always takes exception to that behavior. Just a funny story. One time we had Bikers for Jesus roll into town because they heard about it and they love anything like that. So they all kind of put their bikes outside and came over and said, "Bonnie, can we help?" So I think that they were so enraged by my behavior. I remember one time someone from Osa came through my front door in the evening. I was watching Coronation Street. That irritated me. But anyway,
they irritated you because they interrupted you watching Corrie.
Yeah, exactly. My daughter, my oldest, was like, 13 or 14. She said, "Mom, there's someone at the door, but they've all, obviously we took precautions because we knew they'd come to the house," and they did. And I said, "Don't let anyone in until you call Dad or I." She said, "I told her to wait, but she hasn't." And it was an Office of Special Affairs lady, dear Sheila Chaliff, who came through the front door at me. I got up out of my chair, and she came through the front door. And I just walked towards her, and I just said, you have to leave my house now. My friend said that she walks backward because that's what things do. They come from under rocks, but that's harsh. So that was not pleasant. And when they demonstrated outside the house while I was in London once on Tottenham Court Road, that's when we had like 8 demonstrators, not anonymous. We had about 8 or 10 families, really. Because we had an organization called Families Under Scientology Stress. It was called FUSS because they wanted to make a fuss. But every time we had a meeting, they would so make it uncomfortable for families that eventually we stopped having the meetings because it was too dangerous, really, for the families. So that was a period of time when I think they thought they were more invincible and that no one was going to do anything about it.
And this is all from an organization that outwardly denies it harasses and attacks critics. And I think, yes, they agree. I agree that they used to think they were untouchable. I still think there is an element of that today because it's just so brazen. If you look at the Guardian article that came out earlier this week, it was, Scientology's defense was, we don't harass Alex, we don't attack him. And yet at the same time, they've posted 6,000 tweets and they're continuing to post 100 a day or so since that article went out. So how can both be true, that you're not attacking and harassing people whilst also attacking and harassing people? Like, the evidence is there clear as day. So I think it is so brazen. They are so full of themselves. They think that their way of life is better, is more significant and more important than anybody else's. And that gives them the raison d'etre to, do what they want.
I think they're I think their perception of it, though, is that they're defending their religion, that they really do believe, and I can remember that mindset.
Yeah.
They really do believe that it's their responsibility to defend Scientology from these terrible attacks, and that they should do something. You know, they should stand up for it or do something to help. And so I think that their grasp on reality is not good, because they believe if it's true for them, it's true. So they kind of dismiss any actual facts that could be going on. They wouldn't take the time to investigate, well, who is this person and what, why is she doing that? I did have one young man who said if he ever found out that what I told him was true, he would come out that day. And when he read the news articles after the litigation, his father called me. He said, he wants you to know he's done. So sometimes they were sheltered in a certain extent from any information about who I was or what I was doing. There were files, because I had one escape from Mosa who brought files out about me and who I really was. And it was always difficult for them. It'd be easier for them. I had quite a protective shelter of a strong Christian community. So they had trouble infiltrating people near me, because they'd say, well, we know, who you are, so never mind. We forgive you, but, there you go. They had to get through a lot of people. All my close friends were, kind of not going to be able to be brought on side, so to speak. But I think now, when I look at it now, because it frustrates me now, because when I look at what they do, somehow, particularly in America where the lawsuits are, it so frustrates me that they have to go to arbitration. Yeah. Because I don't understand that. I sued them for libel and they had to go to court.
Well, it's because since, I don't know what year it was, but they added a clause to the staff contract that says if at any point you want to sue Scientology, irrespective of anything else in this contract being considered false or not enforceable, this clause stands on its own as its own contract. And this clause says that if you ever have any legal issues with Scientology, you want it to be dealt with by internal religious arbitration rather than in the courts of law. Wow. So because you have to sign that before you do any staff work or join the Sea Org, you're reinforcing that. So as soon as you do sue them, that's a legally binding contract in some cases. In other cases, judges have looked over it, and the problem with it is because it's religious arbitration, the courts in the US have no jurisdiction over it, because they don't want to step in and agree or decide on what is and isn't religion, because of separation of church and state. So it's really difficult, because Scientology, then they can just keep it going on and on and on, because the courts don't want to step in and say you have to finish it by this date, because then that's imposing on a religious belief. So it's not just arbitration, it's religious arbitration.
So their position as a religious entity is because of their 501c?
Yes.
Okay. So if that were denied, then that would open the door to more.
Exactly. If they had their 501c3 tax exempt status revoked, then that would open the door for so many people to take litigation or legal action against Scientology.
It's the fact that certainly I know that Karen's husband does stellar work in that, and I know that Mike Rinder has told me, and other people that I've spoken to, they've made copious reports to the IRS. Is it because it's not a high priority, they won't investigate it, or is there something more?
It's tricky, isn't it? I don't know is the answer to that. There's probably several factors at play. There's the fact that, yes, this organization has billions of dollars in the bank, but in the scheme of things, it's small fish in the pond, right? There are Russian oligarchs with quantities of money that are easier fish for the IRS to fry. And this would open a huge kettle of fish. You know, this is not going to be an easy thing. And once you open up that can of worms, it's going to be a huge legal battle that's going to take a long time, which will encompass questions like, where is that separation of church and state, and where can the IRS step in and decide what is and isn't a religion? And that is such a big thing. I think the IRS are just unwilling to open up that, you know, that problem.
Yeah, they know how hard they will litigate. What was curious to me was that some of the class action suit of those who lived at St. Hill as children, because we tried to get them out, well, at least to get them some help. We had a lot of evidence. Someone came out with a list of how many children were at what was the residency was called Stonelands at the time, and it was terribly overcrowded. It was outrageous. So we did have some evidence from our refugees. So we did go to social services, and we did try to do something to expose the conditions that children were suffering. So I noticed in some of the recent court cases that some of those people were at St. Hill as children. So I don't know what would prevent them from litigating in England where they're not recognized as a religion.
Well, yeah, their properties are recognized as places of public worship, but they're not recognized as a religious charitable organization. It's
because I sued Cosrecki. I sued them.
Yeah. Tell me about that. I mean, I know we talked about your court case previously, but I'm surprised that Cosrecki, which is, for those watching who don't know, is the UK arm of the Church of Scientology, which is an Australian registered firm.
In Australia.
Yeah, it's an Australian registered firm that does business exclusively in the United Kingdom. How, like, was the first hurdle in that lawsuit not Scientology saying, "Oh, we're Australian, you need to sue us there"? Did you have to come up against that challenge?
Not at all, because it was a libel action. Yeah, so I was suing them for libel, and well, then they got very offended, so they countersued me, and they countersued me for my leaflet, "What the Scientologists Don't Tell You." So then they had Narconon sue me as well. So at one point we were litigating, I think, 3 or 4 court cases in the High Court at once. We were still not represented by anyone other than ourselves. So when I sued them and then they counterclaimed back, it becomes a counterclaim. So they recognized that I have a claim and they have a claim. So that was good. So my barrister said, "Oh, good, we got a claim now." So when we went to court, she wanted to get rid of the lawsuit from Cosrecki and about my leaflet. And also she wanted to get rid of the Narconon lawsuit because it was just overwhelming us with paperwork at that point. And she was very focused on my claim. So we went to court, and we went to court to fight my counterclaim. Their counterclaim against me was that the leaflet. So in order to defend my counterclaim, I had to prove that every line of the leaflet was true. So she went in for discovery and said, in order for my client to prove her defense to your counterclaim, she will need to see the OT levels because she mentions them in her leaflet. You're saying it's not true, so let's have them. Well, we went before a
very smart move. That
she was very smart. She was quite young. She used to skip down the hall because they had quite impressive counsel. They had Nathan. They had other really. They paid a lot of money for their counsel, and they were very good. But they would offer, $20,000 or, go away sort of offers. And they would they would come and see her at a hearing. We had 17 interlocutory hearings. My law firm, Allen and Overy, attended 4 or 5. Richard and I did the first 15. So she would skip down the hall. And they would say, "Did she want the offer?" No. But at this,
no, sorry, go on.
Yeah, at this particular hearing, we had asked for the OT levels. Now, the procedure in an interlocutory is that the justice or the judge will tell you what he's going to say, so that you can, settle it, preferably. That's the purpose of interlocutories, is to get rid of cases that don't need to proceed. So he gave them his judgment, which was to give it to me. Give me the OT levels. Well, I think they had some representatives from America sitting there at the time. And they went into this mad panic. And they came back to court and they said, oh, okay, well, we're dropping the Kozrecki claim, and we're dropping the Narconon claim. And the judge said, well, that's all well and good. Now, he had a great sense of humor, because at that time, the media were gathering outside because of Stephen Lawrence. Nothing to do with me. But the judge, they all have a very wry sense of humor. I learned to get along very well with the justices, and I have a lot of respect for the masters and them. And he said, oh, there's a lot of media here. You might want to, make a quicker decision. Nothing to do with me. So then they came back and said they were dropping their things. And he said, well, that's all well and good. However, Mrs. Woods has spent the last 6 years in litigation. So you're going to have to sign an undertaking. She can say what she wants. Now, my barrister was quite clever, and she drew up an undertaking that was so general. She thought they'd never in a million years sign it. She said, they're never going to sign this, Bonnie, because it says you can use anything in your documentation from the last 6 years. You can say anything, and they can't sue you anywhere. And she said, I doubt they're going to sign it. They couldn't sign it fast enough.
And what impact did this have on fair game? Because obviously they were going after you up until the court case with the leaflet,
and all through it, and all through
it as
stopped all the way up to the court.
But as soon as you signed that undertaking, the court case was over. Did they stop fair gaming you? Because the reason I ask is it was very interesting at the protest in October last year that you joined us at, that they gave you a wide berth. Like, they didn't want to approach you. And with me, I had a security guard following me everywhere I went, all day. And it was a bit of a nuisance. But with you, it's almost like they were scared to even follow you or keep eyes on you. Is that a result of the case?
They do have an undertaking that they can't repeat the lie they used against me, that they can't do that. And I could take them back to court at any point if I found out that was happening. And I did find out it was happening, because people keep escaping, which I love. But people would escape and tell me that they'd been given a knowledge pack, a pack of information about me to read as soon as they went into the organization. But at that point, I mean, since the litigation and their settlement, it's a huge endeavor to go to court. And, they're not going to change their approach, probably. They'll probably be more careful about it. I think they're less aggressive towards me, because they know that I do have that ability to do it if I wanted to do it. Doesn't interest me, but, well, if they want to watch this, which I'm sure they will, don't forget I can do it.
There is evidence to watch every single minute of every single one of my videos. So while we're at it, hi Janet, hi Graham, hi Peter.
I think I met. Well, Peter and I go way back, so it's always good to hear that Peter's safe, at least safe. Maybe not well, or maybe not safe. But anyway, I have.
He received a Rolex watch as a personal gift and a thank you for his hard work from David Miscavige.
Yeah, well, he needs to count the cost of that watch.
I hope you pay tax on it, because you have to pay tax on large value gifts.
Well, I always say, if you want to if you're going to sup with the devil, you better have a pretty long spoon. That's a personal favorite of mine. And I can say that because I said that Hubbard was a Satanist, and I can say that if I want to.
But carry on. What are you going to say? You said you're glad that Peter's doing well.
I am glad. I love them.
Yeah.
My heart is to see them come out and be free.
And this is the thing with everything that I'm doing, and I hope this came across in the protests that you came to in October.
Yeah.
I'm really trying hard to lead my activism with kindness and compassion.
Yeah.
Like, it's, even though Scientology say in all of their hate websites and attack tweets and statements to the press that I'm an anti-religious bigot and this is a hate campaign of harassment, actually it's almost quite the opposite, because I don't care if you want to be a Scientologist, right? In fact, I will defend your right to believe in Scientology if you so choose. I may disagree with your beliefs, but you have a right to believe in Scientology. What you can't do is behave in the way they're behaving. Fair gaming critics, forcing families to disconnect, forced abortions, all of this extortion of elderly people and all of the other abuse that goes on in Scientology. That behavior is what I'm protesting against. And I'm trying to separate the belief from behavior. But in doing so, be kind and compassionate and say, no, look, we love Scientologists, right? Just as much as we love anybody else. We don't have anything against you if you're a Scientologist.
Excellent.
We just want you to be aware of what Scientology are doing. And with that knowledge, you then are empowered to make the decision yourself, whether you want to stay or leave. But when all of the information you're receiving is controlled by Scientology, you're not even aware of the reality of the organization that you're a part of.
Well, I think that was always the premise that one of my dearest friends, John Atek, and I always had with interventions. But they love to, wallpaper deprogramming or whatever all over it. I remember doing an intervention once, and I walked into the room, and the young man said, "You're in jail." I said, "Well, not actually." I said, "The reality is I'm here." But he already, sometimes it was almost impossible to reach them because they'd already been, given so much information that it was very difficult to do. But I think rescue is my primary concern. I'm keen on rescuing rabbits and Scientologists. But what I don't understand is I went to a rabbit rescue when I was home for the first time in 29 years, which was a joy. I went to a rabbit rescue, and it was great. It was all set up as a rescue, for the rabbits. And but what I don't understand, I understand the aftermath, and I understand what they're doing, and I think that's good. But I don't think they're ready. Some may not be ready to enter society on any level without some sheltered accommodation, where there are people there who understand. Because the level of damage, particularly with Sea Org members, the level of damage they've suffered, they're going to need a better runway back into society through. And I did go to New England to work in a center like that, but they themselves were quite terrified of Scientology. But that's what that would be my vision, to have places where there are former members who could help someone, make a transition back. Because I think it'd be very difficult on your own.
Yeah.
That yourself from your own recovery.
Yeah, it's reintegration into society. Scientology makes you think in a completely different way to everybody else, right? And especially if you were a child in Scientology, whether or not you joined or were raised in Scientology, if you were a child in Scientology, it actually has formed neural pathways in your mind. And that's a really hard thing to combat, that takes a lot of time to figure out. And reintegrating into society is a big task, and it does require a lot of support and help. And there's definitely a gap in the market, if you like,
Yeah.
for some sort of intervention halfway house. But that's a really difficult thing because it's very expensive to have a physical property.
Sure.
It's opening yourself up to all sorts of litigation from Scientology
Yeah.
and fair game. Of course, Scientology will do anything they can to try and get you shut down every single day of the week.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's a challenge for sure. But
Well,
that doesn't mean it
even
shouldn't
a
be
short
done.
term. There used to be a facility in America called Wellspring, and they were like you could go there for like a shorter period of time, and they used to address all of the cults, not just Scientology. But it's always difficult for any group that wants to assist cult recovery, even a counselor, to understand the mindset. Because you have to really have an understanding of what it does. I had a young man I counseled for probably 4 or 5 months, and he had been educated at Delphi, and it was a long road to piece it all back together. And I think a lot of the counseling techniques of those cult recovery counselors, perhaps like Stephen Hassan or whatever, I would probably say John Atek is the only expert I know who can actually go into that maze and help them find the path out. I think that's a problem. So they would have to really educate themselves or spend time, with people like yourself as to try and understand the mindset. It's perverse at best.
Education is really important. It's important to. I talk a lot about the different strands of protesting and how there are live streamers standing outside orgs all day, every day in LA, and that's fantastic. There are people organizing more one-off events like the IES protests at St. Hill. There are people who are commenting on YouTube videos, which may not feel like being an activist, but it absolutely is, because it's helping get the message out there. All of these things help the wider cause. And I think education is also a huge part of that. Educating counselors on how Scientology works and like the methods that they use to coercively control people, educating politicians and policymakers on how Scientology operates and how they like to try and control and infiltrate government, and influencing law enforcement about how Scientology prevents you from reporting anything to law enforcement. You can't report another Scientologist to the police. So I think all of those, that's just 3 examples of people that need to be educated on how Scientology works. And the more of that is done, the greater understanding there will be. And therefore, hopefully, it's more likely we'll see justice.
I think that when I was very involved at one point as an advisor to, I would say probably 4 or 5 psychiatrists. I spent a fair amount of time in institutions with damaged people who were damaged from leaving, and they were quite keen on understanding it. And they said themselves their hands were tied in some extent because of the programming of Scientologists, the phobia induction of speaking to psychiatrists.
Yeah.
So I had one young man who survived jumping in front of a mainline train in London. How he survived is miraculous to me. But his sister called me, and he had been walking around London and seen a refrigerator van that said Hubbard on the top with a fan, and it triggered him to jump in front of a train. Somehow he survived, and he somehow got between the tracks. So all he did was dislocate his hip. So I went to see him in hospital, but he refused to have anything, of course, to do with the psychiatrist. So I spent time with him at his bedside, and he had actually broken his hip, so he was in traction. And the young psychiatrist was a registrar, and he said, "Oh, Bonnie, can you help? Because he won't talk to me, and he won't let us take the traction off, take the whatever they call that thing." And I said, "Okay." So I went in and I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Well, this isn't my leg. I think my leg is on the track." And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "But we need something workable. We have to have workable technique, don't we? He said, yes, we do. And I said, well, I can contact British Rail and talk to them about it. I said, but I have to say honestly, I'm not sure that lake will be workable. I said, are you finding this one workable? He said, yes, I am. And he took his hand and pulled his thing, and it went, whoosh. And the nurse and doctor came running in and said, what's going on? He said, we've agreed. This is good. This is a workable lake. We'll have this one. I said, terrific. He was a Rhodes Scholar in Greek and Latin. He was an amazing young man. But I'm telling you, he absolutely believed what he believed. And then, of course, John became involved too at some point. And John is phenomenal. I mean, I can't even describe to you. If you ever get the opportunity.
John is great. Yeah, I've had many a conversation with him.
He doesn't do much of that anymore. Yeah. But that's a problem as well, I think, to address. Yeah.
And how has, I don't know how closely you've been following. I mean, obviously you went to the protest. You joined me in protest in October. Like, how has the protest movement changed over the years since the anonymous movement? Obviously, it's smaller now. You're talking 700 people during the anonymous movement. It was a huge thing back then. It's smaller now. But it has definitely been revived. You know, there were many years where there weren't any protests outside St. Hill.
Exactly.
Apart from the numbers, what's changed about the protest movement from what you've observed?
I don't think it's changed. I think with Anonymous, we only discovered Anonymous accidentally. Richard and I had gone to London and somehow ended up on Victoria Street, just curious about what the org looked like, because we don't generally go to that part of London. So we thought we'd walk by. And
no one generally goes to that part of London. It's the most dead street.
It's kind of dead there. Yeah. So then all of a sudden I said, Richard, what are they all doing? You know, and then we looked at their signs and one of them came up and said, hi. I said, hi. He said, do you know anything about Scientology? I said, a bit. And then we started to chat, and then they just started to talk to me about coming to another one. They were going to have another one, and they used to like to go on the tube from there to Tottenham Court Road, and then the police would corral them into a box, sort of, but they were very easy to corral, and the police loved them. I remember being outside Victoria Road when a police sergeant on his horse was, and I believe it was Mr. Hodkin who came out to complain about it. And he said, I don't have a problem. He said, they're the easiest people I've ever dealt with. They have cake.
Same thing happened with us. Every time I've protested and the police have been called, the police have said, you're not doing anything illegal. In fact, you're being very peaceful and nice. And our biggest problem is the fact that Scientology keep calling us and telling us you're doing stuff when you're not. And one police officer remarked last year that this was the most peaceful protest she'd ever attended, which is a complete contrast to what Scientology will have you believe. But, you know, it's an important movement. And I think the police recognize that we are not acting in bad faith and we're not breaking the rules.
As much as you want to go to the where Lord Sauron lives, as much as you like the idea of protesting outside St. Hill, I think your public information would be more available if you were in London.
Yeah, well, we've done both.
There's a lot of body traffic. That's really important.
Of course, we've done both. You know, we've protested outside London org. I've protested outside Sunderland org. The St. Hill protests are geared at trying to reach current Scientologists, you know, because it's the IES event. It's the largest event in Europe. And so the messaging is, hey, there's a community here of people to support you if you choose to leave. Whereas I think protesting outside London org, for example, you're not going to reach that many Scientologists, but you are going to reach people who are going to join Scientology. You can prevent that from happening.
Well,
so I
can
think
also
that's two different messages.
You are also, though, reaching people who will talk to people.
Yes.
And if that person who's looking at it says anything to anyone, they'll say, oh, no, wait a minute. So I think Anonymous was phenomenal because they were so well connected across the world. And also their attention was on it. That whatever their attention goes on, they seem to be really able to muster an army of people who are interested as well. Yeah. But I mean, not to undervalue what you're doing. I just want more people to do it with you.
Yeah. No, yeah. Absolutely. And I think, yeah, but I think there's also a large community of people online who, for example, aren't able to make protests in person because they're disabled or because they live miles away from any town, or you know, the movement is so spread out, right? I have people commenting on my videos all the time saying, I live at, hello from Australia, hello from Austria, hello from, you know, Thailand or wherever. And it's amazing because when you combine that together, you end up with huge statistics. You know, I've had over 1 million views on my videos, but that's not a million people standing on the streets of me in London, you know, because that's a bit more of a difficult ask.
Well, also, I think the more people, if we can just encourage people to share it and share it and share it, because that's what Anonymous did. They did this huge campaign too. And they did it all at the same time on the same day, which focused it as well. Yeah. And they had cake, which was nice. But
I brought cake. Do you know about what happened to the cake at LRH's birthday?
Where was the cake?
So it was LRH's birthday last year, right? Nice. And so I organised a protest outside London Org, and the message of the protest was they're celebrating, you know, LRH's life. And so we're going to celebrate life without LRH. And we're going to show how it is possible to be happy without Hubbard's technology in our lives. And so I went up to London Org, and for the first time in over a decade, I opened the door of the org and I walked into the reception with a cake. And I said to the receptionist, here, this is happy birthday, Mr. Hubbard. I've brought him a cake. And the security guy said, you need to leave right now. I'm like, look, I'm just delivering a cake.
Only cake.
And I'd already turned around and was leaving, like, walking towards the exit. You need to leave. I'm like, yeah, I am leaving. I'm in the process of leaving. I just delivered a cake. And you know what he did? Is he, as soon as I walked out of the door, he dropped the cake on the floor, shut the door, and then an executive who used to be my boss walked on it and stepped on the cake, and it became known as Cakegate. And you know what was even funnier? When the police came later, they said Scientology have been complaining that you are obstructing the entrance to the org and standing in the way. And I said, well, Mr. Officer, the only obstruction that I see to the entrance of the org is that cake that's on the floor. And he was like,
safety risk.
Yeah, the police said, yeah, that is an obstruction. I said, yeah. I gave it to them and they chucked it on the floor. I told them the story and he was like, oh. I said, so, you know, they should really be removing that, because what if there's a fire and people need to escape the building in a hurry? That's a trip hazard. And the police said, yeah, that's dangerous, isn't it? And I said, yeah. Well, you know what, Mr. Officer, just to show how we are acting here in good faith, if the fire alarm goes off, I will go and remove the cake for them. And the police officer said, that's very kind of you.
I like it. I think that one thing that was somewhat successful and is that I would take my leaflet in the early days to Brighton and just shadow the recruiter on the street. And every time they gave out a personality test, or I'd say, well, take this and read it before you go. And those kind of things were helpful, I think. But I think it with you're such a technical wizard, and I use that term not specifically wizardly, but I think you know me, I'm not keen on wizards, but I think that just if we could just magnify the sharing all the time. You know, just if you just say, if you want to do anything, just share it. Share this, share it. Because it's going to that's what Anonymous found so successful, was their connection to everybody else, except on the, I wandered into the dark web, and Anonymous had to rescue me. And they were so cute because they came on the dark web, which I didn't even know what it was. And they were doing their thing where they, it's some sort of strange banter. But anyway, they said, leave her alone. She's not meant to be here. So kind of rescuing me from that. But I think your tool is obviously social media.
No.
Yeah.
I swear I didn't pay you to say that.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. No, that's so important is sharing stuff. You know, if you can't stand there and be there and protest in person, press the like button, comment. When I say these things, it's not because I necessarily want the channel to grow or because I want the engagement, but it's because it pushes the video out to more people. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to raise awareness. So any engagement or interaction is great. And not just my channel. Share news articles, share links to resources, email your member of parliament and say, hey, this is a matter I'm worried about. Will you help me act on this? Changing the coercive control legislation, anything like this, just getting the conversation going is helpful.
I think undue influence is so important because their premise of arbitration is based on someone signing something with consent. And they're certainly not signing that with consent, really. So that's really important, too, I think, to get the undue influence understood so that litigation can overrule that process. What happened with the case where they were going to get some sort of protection order at St. Hill? So you can't.
Yes, the PSPO, Public Spaces Protection Order, that is still ongoing. Yeah, so Scientology applied for a protest ban, basically called a PSPO, and obviously there were council observers present at the protest. You spoke to them, you gave your statement. So did Richard. So did I. That was the evidence gathering period. And then they were going to review the evidence, and then it was going to be sent to the cabinet for a vote on whether they needed to implement a PSPO. And if they were to vote towards doing it, there would then be a wider public consultation period, which would involve the wider public being asked for their thoughts. And then, based on that, they would vote on whether to ban protesting or not. The evidence gathering period has closed, and they are still reviewing the evidence gathered back in October. You have to consider they have hundreds of hours of body cam footage from the police, of live stream footage from myself and other streamers, from statements from people. And so they are reviewing all of that as we speak and seeking legal advice. So all I can say at this stage is stay tuned. But personally, I think it's highly unlikely they'll ban protesting, because in order for a PSPO to be put in place, there needs to be evidence of persistent, ongoing disruption. There have been 2 protests in the last 6 years. That's not persistent.
not persistent, no. And I think that when Anonymous was doing their thing, there was no real reaction from them at that point. I was surprised because, I'm telling you, Tottenham Court Road was a joy to behold, but they were outrageously obstructive, not on purpose, just by sheer number. And they did that for quite a while. That went on for a little bit of a while. It'd be nice if Anonymous turned their attention back again. But they would also have to have some kind of incentive, something that I'm not sure what it was that triggered Anonymous's interest. I think it was a kind of a challenge to them to take down the website for their sheer entertainment. But something triggered their interest. But then, of course, they saw some young men involved with it get prosecuted, but that wouldn't have deterred them because they really don't care about that. But it'd be nice if they paid attention again. So if you're out there, Anonymous, come back. I'll come out again and eat cake.
Bonnie, thank you so much.
Oh, it's always a joy. Alex.
I'm truly honored to consider you a friend and to have stood alongside you at St.
Well,
Hill.
we were honored
And
to be there.
I'm honestly, I'm in awe at the fight that you have, put up so far in Scientology, going to court, winning, a harassment case, and not being put down or intimidated by their harassment, and the fact that you're still alive and kicking, and encouraging people to protest and joining protests yourselves. It's an inspiration, truly. So thank you.
I think it's actually they have to take responsibility for my being involved in any of this activity at all. It's because they insisted every time I did a magazine article or I had a phone line, they insisted on doing this kind of fair game. I used to say, what can a housewife like myself, what threat could I possibly be for you? Just let me speak. And when they said, no, you can't speak, I thought, no, wait a minute. The ruby shoes started clicking.
That's the same with me. Is such a big fuel. Leave me alone. Is like, leave me alone and stop the abuse, right? The solutions are really simple, right? If Scientology were to start paying their SEAL staff minimum wage, were to allow them to leave at any time they want, to give them holiday and time off, right, and to stop abusing people in the form of forced abortions, forced familial disconnection, and harassing critics. Those are 5 really, really simple things that are quite easy to do. If they did those things, I would probably stop protesting, because it's the behavior that I'm against. So it's really simple. And every time you try and stifle my free speech, criticize me, and intimidate me into silence, it just makes me want to fight harder.
It's a terrible thing we're suffering with. Alex, also, there is one thing I wanted to get out to the community in America, which I haven't seemed to be able to reach. Because of the protection I have with undertakings, publishing things, and just general knowledge of litigation and the practices that were successful, Richard and I are always happy to help someone who's in litigation. But they don't seem, I think there's too big a pond between us, and they think, well, that's the English courts. But I think there are some things some knowledge that's transferable. And we're happy to help. I mean, we worked hard for 7 years to get it, and to be able to say I can say anything in my documentation, and the fact that we've experienced fair game, so we can testify to that. But we don't seem to have any request for that. But
well, there we go. People hopefully will be aware of now, and hopefully can contact you. I will I don't know if you want to make your email address public knowledge, so how about we suggest people email me if they want to get in touch with you, and I can then forward that email to you.
Alex, not that you don't have enough to do already.
No, but, and so if people want to contact Bonnie, email hello@apostatealex.com saying, hey, I'd like to get in touch with Bonnie, and then I'll forward that to you, and then you can talk to them privately.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate it, and thank you so much.
I don't know how to make it stop.
It's all right. I'll hit
you do. Okay. Bye for now.